right now, so we're just restarting where we left off. We just talked about in terms of what the isur of electricity could be. And the first approach, and this is an approach which is a dominant approach, is that basically if you are doing a melacha through the aegis of electricity, whether in a simple old-fashioned incandescent bulb, so we're talking about burning a filament, or if it's cooking or grinding, writing, if it would be a printer perhaps. In other words, whatever the malacha is, so that is the malacha wasn't the electricity. The malacha was whatever malacha was accomplished through the aegis of electricity. So the notion of direct malacha, it doesn't really matter if I'm turning, let's say, turning a wheel and that causes something to grind, or if I press a button and the blades turn and it grinds there. However I accomplish the malacha, it's done, right? If we talk about in general, those of you who might be thinking about grama under these circumstances, that doing things without a direct cause, anything which is a closed system isn't grama. In other words, if I press down on the accelerator on my car, that releases the gasoline into, let's say, into the carburetor, and burns the fuel and fuels the engine. So that's a closed system. That's not considered to be grama. Nobody would say that if I were to drive the car and try to run someone over with the car, that wasn't an act of murder on my part because of that. In other words, whatever I'm doing and it's happening automatically, that is considered to be my action. So by the same token, if I'm using electricity as the means to accomplish my ends, so if the ends are malacha, so I've accomplished the malacha, but the electricity itself isn't a factor necessarily in terms of it being usher. So then the question becomes, what if I'm not doing a malacha? If the action on that the electricity accomplishes, let's say a simple case, a fan, right? I plug in a fan, or I turn the switch on an electric fan, and the blade turns. There's no malacha on Shabbat of turning a blade to cause wind currents. That is there's no isur to take a hand fan and to fan myself or something along those lines. So why should it be usur to turn on the fan on Shabbat? If the only malacha that's usur is the malacha that's being accomplished, so that should be permissible. And here there are different approaches. I'm going to focus on two of them, maybe three. The one was already stated by the Chazon Ish, and this was a piece that was published in 1911. Perhaps he had written it earlier, but as you can see, this is all of these pieces are within the early decades of electricity. And here he says he had not made Aliyah yet, about 20 years before he made Aliyah. So he's in Lithuania, in Vilna, and he writes that this is because of od yesh bazeh in electricity, mishum tikun mana. In other words, what the electricity accomplishes, he says, is fixing the instrument that is the appliance that we're talking about. Kevan shemamido atchunato lizrom et hazerem hachashmal b'tmidut v'karov d'zeh boneh min haTorah. So the very famous formulation of the Chazon Ish, that basically a fan, let's just keep talking about the fan. So the fan without the electricity is basically worthless. It's just it's a piece of furniture, and not necessarily an attractive piece of furniture at that. And so now, when I turn on the electricity, so I, in effect, complete the fan. And that is the malacha, and he feels that this is an isur d'oraita of makeh b'patish, of accomplishing a specific goal with the not only accomplishing a goal, finishing, making something an appliance or an instrument, making it useful, and this is the melacha. He says that perhaps it's even one additional step of bonev, of actually making something, specifically if you have to plug it into the wall, so then that would also be boneh, building. But we'll leave that aside. We'll stick to the idea of makeh b'patish. And his argument, and we're not going to read it inside because we lost a few minutes with the delay. But basically, his argument is that whenever you take something and you make it you give it purpose, so that is considered to be makeh b'patish. Now, the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal wrote a Kuntrus Chashmal. He wrote in the 1930s. He wrote a piece that was later incorporated in his Shailot and Shuvot of Minchat Shlomo here in Chelik Aleph Siman Tet, in which he takes the different approaches to electricity that had preceded him and analyzes them and agrees or disagrees. He disagrees strongly with the Chazon Ish, and he says that this shouldn't be considered to be makeh b'patish. This should not be considered a situation where you're completing a vessel, you're completing a utensil, because because this is just to say the following. It says, Kevan shehu kvar aruch umutzukan lakach umitzad ikar maseh v'lei rak milta zutrata v'gam lo mitkayem. So this is basically the turning on the electricity is the purpose of the fan. In other words, this is exactly what it was designed for. It's not that I finished the fan. If I had taken a screw, if let's say a wire was loose, and I connected the wire to the fan, that would be makeh b'patish. In other words, at that point, the fan can't be used, and I physically fix something inside the fan. Right, I connect something to the fan. If let's say I were to, if there were wires I buy the fan and the plug isn't connected, and I connect the plug to the fan. That's makeh b'patish, because the fan is basically useless until I do that. Here, this is exactly what the fan is designed to do. The fan is designed to be plugged into the wall, and for me to be flipping the switches. This in a paragraph which isn't here, he basically compares it to opening and closing a door. In other words, I have the door. I wouldn't say it's makeh b'patish to open the door so I can walk into the house. Now, it's true, I can't walk into the house if I don't open the door. So I have accomplished something by opening it, but I wouldn't say that opening the door is now makeh b'patish. I've made the door useful in this way. By the same token, I haven't made the fan useful by turning it on. That's exactly what an electric appliance is supposed to be doing, and what it's designed for. So that's not makeh b'patish. That's simply using the object, right? You could say that with regard to everything, right? If I cut something with a knife, so until that point, the knife was just a lump of metal, but by cutting with it, by picking it up and and slicing whatever it is, so that I've given the knife purpose. That's the equivalent, he says, of flipping a switch on a electric appliance. So he rejects the Chazon Ish. So the Chazon Ish's position, it's important to state, is a well-known position. It is not generally accepted lahalacha, but it's one of those positions which remains a dat mi'ut, which remains a minority opinion, and is taken into account here, the chumrah, in the halachic dialogue. There are those who, modern poskim, or I should say contemporary poskim, all of these poskim are modern poskim, but contemporary poskim, Rav Asher Weiss, for example, Rav Shechter, who view makeh b'patish as being an important factor. Rav Weiss, in a piece in Minchat Asher, even views it, continues that he doesn't agree with the way the Chazon Ish formulates it, but basically says that it's a general kind of idea of makeh b'patish, and perhaps electricity as a whole should be viewed under those under that rubric. Rav Shechter views it perhaps as makeh b'patish on a rabbinic level, but basically the majority opinion is to move away from the Chazon Ish. And so if that's the case, so we still don't have an explanation why electricity in of itself, as opposed to what it accomplishes, should be usher. Right? Again, I just don't want to. I can't stress enough that if the electricity is doing a malacha, whatever that malacha is, that is that's asur midoraita, because the malacha has been accomplished. Here we're focusing on just the electricity of itself when the final product does not create a malacha doraita. The second opinion, other than the first opinion here being the Chazon Ish and those who perhaps follow in his footsteps in one way or another, viewing it as a form of makeh b'patish, form of completion, there is a second opinion, and that is the opinion of the Beit Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak Shmelkus, who lived in, he was the Rav in Galicia, and Lvov was his last Steller. At the end of the 19th, he passed away, I think, in 1906. He was a very influential posek. So there are those who considered him the posek hador for the late 19th century in Poland, and he has many tshuvot that deal with contemporary technological and sociological issues, which have had ramifications and continue to ripple to this very day. Very influential posek. His in this, one of the more important tshuvot is his tshuva with regard to electricity, and he was talking about specifically with regard to in this part of the tshuva at least, whether you can Risha'im ledaber b'Shabbat al yidei mechona hanikra telephone. Well, here it's 1889. The phone, if I'm not mistaken, Alexander Graham Bell introduced the telephone, I think in 1876, and so now we have this modern invention of the telephone, and the question is, well, of course, can I use the telephone? Now here, right, as opposed to the light bulb, there is no malacha that's being accomplished by speaking on the telephone, because again, there's no the idea that the sound waves being transferred electronically, that is not a malacha. So why should I not be able to use a telephone on Shabbat? So he says the following: Hinei lefi ani adati, my humble opinion, yesh isur b'davar, v'shomer nafsho yirchak mimenu. So a person who is careful about Shabbat, so should stay away from this. Ki milvad ma shemuchrach lamidaber mimchoneh kazot lahakot mikodem bepa'amon et yirtzeh ledaber. So the technology of the day, you have to bang on the the receiver, ringing a bell so that the operator knows that you're on the line, and that creates a sound. We would say perhaps if I'm causing a ringtone to be sounded, that is so that's an isur d'Rabbanan. Yesh isur od mishum da'al yidei skirat hazerem ha'elektri nolad koach elektri. V'zeh asur b'Shabbat. So he says that the isur here is the creation of the current, but there's no melacha. That's because, of course, there's no isur that we know of creating a current. But ze asur b'Shabbat kamo b'schufei ashiroi the amrinan the Beit daf chaf gimel the asur mishum the molid recha. There's a rabbinic concept where what's called molid. Molid means to create a new state. It's not, by the way, it shouldn't be confused with nolad. Nolad is something which was created, and is that something which is muktzah, an object which didn't exist before Shabbat, and now the case Beitzah shenolad b'Yom Tov, an egg that was born, that was laid on Yom Tov. So the egg was not present beforehand. So that's a muktzah question. This isn't a muktzah question. This is a question of, can I create a new state? And of course, that's somewhat, I guess you could say, somewhat ambiguous what a new state is. But he wants to say, the Gemara's example is if I scent clothing. In other words, if I rub perfume into clothing, and so that's asur on Shabbat, on Yom Tov and on Shabbat, because the Gemara says that's molid reach, right? That is a creation of a new odor, a new scent on Shabbat, and that is forbidden. So he wants the fact that now I have a scented garment, that's asur. So he wants to say that similarly, if I talk about if I have an electric current, so that will also be asur on Shabbat. He wants to go one step further, which poskim don't accept for the most part lahalacha, and that's with regard to zoda vaser, right, the soda stream. He would say also making the carbonating water on Shabbat is also changing the nature of the water, and that is asur midrabanan of this idea of molid. Here too, Rav Shlomo Zalman voices his we'll say his disagreement. Basically, he says the following. He says that he doesn't believe necessarily that that this is going to be that you can necessarily call this a form of molid, because the same way that it's not makeh b'patish, here the electricity is, it's true, it's not currently flowing through the wires, but it's designed for the electricity to flow through. So for the current to flow through. So to call that molid, that something is new, has been made here, is, he feels, a misnomer. So he says explicitly, Ein l'asur b'Shabbat v'Yom Tov lo mishum makeh b'patish v'lo mishum molid. Right. So again, specifically talking about using a telephone, he's saying there shouldn't be any asur. However, isur, he says. However, he says nevertheless he feels that it shouldn't be used, and the reason for this is choshvani shehamon ha'am eino yodeh klal lavchin b'kach v'yachol lit'ot al yedei zeh lomar shemutar gam lahadlik u'lechabot et hachashmal b'Shabbat. So since this is too fine a distinction, in other words, the moment that we start saying electricity is forbidden on Shabbat, and it doesn't matter why electricity is forbidden on Shabbat. people understand that. If I start saying that I can use a telephone, but I can't turn on a light, so that he feels is going to be too problematic a formulation for at least a significant percentage of the population to understand, and then you're going to be on the proverbial slippery slope. Well, it's basically you're not going to be able to explain it as sharply as is necessary, and people are going to make mistakes. So it's better just simply to say electricity is asur on Shabbat and leave it at that. So he is willing. So he says, therefore, you shouldn't allow for it except in place of a great need. Just as an example of where he allows you to use it. So using a hearing aid on Shabbat. Basically, very similar technologies. Between that, microphones, which he does not allow for the use of, because again, it's a public use and it's something which people will not be able to differentiate between. Very similar technology to the telephone and the like. But in a case where a person requires a hearing aid, otherwise he's unable to interact with the world in the same way that he's able to with the hearing aid. So he says that it's asur, and then he says the following, a very interesting formulation. Ma shekvar hore zaken. But what am I going to do? The zaken, who agon marenu Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkes, the Shut Beit Yitzchak, the tshuva that we just saw. That he says the hadavar has said it. So hadavar tzariach hachra'a. It requires further analysis. It seems, to my opinion, and there are those who I've seen have said that Rav Shlomo Zalman here is conceding to the Beit Yitzchak. I'm not convinced. I think that basically, and others also are not convinced, not just me, but that basically that he's basically saying that he doesn't think that it's asur. But he doesn't believe that, but at the same time, especially since he doesn't want to make this a breach and say things are mutter, because otherwise people are going to make mistakes. So therefore, he says that it's it's something which requires further analysis, and we recognize that the Beit Yitzchak said what he said. In a later siman, just to prove my point, he says explicitly, "Right? So he says, I don't think that we can create our own concept of calling this molid. Certainly not Isur D'Oraita. So this is an important point. So one of the things that he does say elsewhere is that why is a microphone forbidden if a hearing aid is mutter? So he says that it's what's zilute milta, something which is inappropriate on Shabbat. And we're going to come back to that idea. But if that's the case, so then basically we have the following question. So it's basically what you have is a situation where the either we'll say one of three things. That either the reason electricity in of itself is usher, again, without doing another malacha, either because it's some form of makah b'patish along the lines of the Chazon Ish, or it's a form of molid along the lines of the Beit Yitzchak, or it's something which is inappropriate to do on Shabbat. Now, this will create all sorts of questions and distinctions as the technology changes. In other words, what happens if something is if we're dealing with an Isur D'Oraita along the lines of the Chazon Ish? So then we're going to treat that very differently than if we're dealing with an Isur D'Rabbanan of Molid, or if we're dealing with something which is not within the spirit of Shabbat. On the other hand, now because of the time. And I'm going to go a few minutes over as it is because of the break that we had. I don't have time to get into I'm just going to say outside, without, because I want to get to my major thrust, which I told you was not the technical side, but the question of the physical side. Now, all of this being said, what happens if you're dealing with a situation where we're not dealing with the next category, we're not dealing with starting a new current running through the wires, but rather the current is there, and it's just a question of modulating the current. Let's say if you're not closing any, no transistors, no fuses are being opened or closed along those lines, but rather it's just simply a question of raising the current, and will make let's say the fan go at a stronger rate. Or if the connection, if I've turned on the microphone or turned on the hearing aid already, and or taken the telephone off the hook, and now it's just speaking in the telephone. If the Zoom camera is running beforehand. In other words, all of these things are situations where there is already current, and I am my actions of merely changing the amount of current. So if it's a question of molid, it shouldn't be a problem. And if it's a question of makeh b'patish, so then perhaps it will be a problem, because again, I'm creating something new. I wanted it on a higher speed of the fan, let's say a fan blade, and now that's been accomplished. And if it's some form of makeh b'patish, that still might be a problem. One other aspect which we need to talk about is a question of melechet machshevet, namely doing things in terms of what is my intent, what is my knowledge, and that's, as I said, if I had about 10 minutes more, we could go into it in depth. However, I'll just point out that here, when it comes to various sensors, so I'll just now take the position of the Tzomit Institute. This is also the position of Rav Rimon, for example. Basically, to follow the position of the Beit Yitzchak, to follow the issues that are molid, that this is considered to be an Isur D'Rabbanan when I use electricity. And then the question becomes, well, first of all, if the appliance the current isn't being introduced, but is being modulated, so that is already a much less of a problem. And then the issue of whether my personal activity, if I'm aware of what I am doing when I am turning something on. So this position is so for example, if I have a sensor which opens a door. So the position at Machon Tzomit, and I think most poskim, would be that is forbidden, because here, even if there is a current running through the sensor at all times, I'm introducing, I might be closing I might be opening, every particular device is different, but I might be opening and closing sensors, new electricity, new current is running through, etc. It becomes asur, even though I'm not, it's just walking by, but I couldn't walk through the door if it didn't open. So that would be forbidden. On the other hand, if I'm walking down the street and there are cameras, as security cameras and the like, so that isn't forbidden, because I'm going through the action, and it's not something which I'm even cognizant of, and and my own activity is based on a tshuva of the Shevet HaLevi, which is here on your left-hand side of the screen. You can look at it afterwards. Again, I don't have time to get into it, but basically, this is this is something which is I'm not aware of at the time, and therefore it's permissible. Other people don't feel that it doesn't really matter if I'm aware of it. If I know that it's happening, or I should know that it's happening, I have to find other reasons to explain why it may be permissible. Now, this leads me to the following observation. Okay, as electricity is becoming more and more involved in our lives in ways that we are even totally unaware of, just examples that I've seen in in newspapers, in high-rise buildings, modern high-rise buildings, basically there are sensors that are involved in the water pressure of the building, and determining how much water and should be sent to each particular apartment when you flush a toilet. Now, a person is unaware of that, right? The older systems obviously didn't have that. The newer systems do. It's efficient. It saves a lot of money over a course of time in a large building. All sorts of appliances, smart refrigerators. The appliances themselves are gauging the temperature, gauging the energy level going in, deciding when to turn on the automatic defrost cycle, etc. All of these have new sensors and the like. So is it usher for me to open up the refrigerator under those circumstances? Is it usher for me to be in a home or a hotel room where the thermostat has a motion detector? As if I saw in an article a couple of years ago in the New York Times, basically that said if you are in a hotel room and you wake up in the middle of the night and it's uncomfortably warm, so wave your hand, because there's a good chance that basically the air conditioner works on a motion sensor. It doesn't sense you in bed, right? If you're a sound sleeper and you're not tossing in bed, so there isn't motion. And so the air conditioner turned off in the room. So all you have to do is move a little bit and then the air conditioner will go on. So does that mean that now you can't move if you're in a hotel room? No, every single situation needs to be looked at. So if I'm going to now say the following, there could be basically I'm going to say three approaches, general approaches that need to be taken. One approach basically is to say that we have to have dumb homes, because we can't have smart homes. We're going to be basically create a situation where in order to have a Shabbos hashgacha, if you will, you're going to need 1990 technology, or maybe 2000 technology, and not beyond that. And if you have a home which doesn't have a hashgacha, then you have a problem. That's going to be perhaps one way of going about it. The other way of going about it, and here, if you're interested, I just on the right hand of this column where it says Malachet Machshevet. So this was you can see it's an article that was published 2 years ago in the Lehr House, and you can go online and look it up. So Rabbi Ike Sultan, who's a young Rabbi, I think at the time he was in the Kolo YU. I don't know where he is now. So he wrote a very interesting article about the developing technologies with regarding smartwatches on Shabbat and what you can use or cannot use. And he analyzes it based on many of the things that I've spoken about here, in terms of just trying to figure out, okay, in everything that I'm doing, each particular item, is it permissible? Is it not permissible? In other words, you're basically going to need Alexa, you're going to need artificial intelligence to and maybe this is a good app to develop, to access the owner's manual and the technology on each device, and tell you, okay, this is mutter to be used according to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. This is mutter to be used according to the Chazon Ish. This is mutter to be used according to the Beit Yitzchak. In other words, basically rank it. There's a website available with regard to whiskeys that rank the whiskeys based on the different poskim and give them obviously the completely different shaila in terms of the halacha, but basically says, okay, this whiskey is mutter according to the shita of Rav Moshe Feinstein only. He's the most makil. This whiskey is mutter according to the other poskim who disagree with Rav Moshe for whatever the reason, and gives them star ratings in terms of the hashgachot. And we could do that with appliances too. Of course, here it's much more of a moving target, because one Fitbit doesn't necessarily use the exact same technology as a different Fitbit. And so each case is going to have to be analyzed, and your model might be different. The very same model might be different 1 year or even 1 month to the next. It does the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 12 Pro have the exact same technologies that are being used. So each of these cases has to be analyzed to tell you, okay, this is permissible, this isn't permissible, this is going to be mutter according to this sheet or that sheet. And maybe that's what we have to do. And it was according to all of these different approaches, and as I'm taking many different halachic concepts, both with regard to what electricity is, as well as to what melechet machshevet is, and determining whether something is going to be allowed or not. Maybe that's the road that we have to take. The third road, and this is what I really want to, is really the crux of the shir, and I'm only going to give it 5 to 8 minutes. But basically is based on this week's parsha. In our parsha, I'll just point out the table on the top here on the 3rd page shows how Shabbat itself develops. In other words, in Sefer Shemot, from the time that Shabbat is introduced to the Jewish people in Parshat B'Shalach, our parsha, with regard to the man, through the Aseret HaDibrot, as we move along in the in the parsha from right to left. So we have Parshat B'Shalach, we have the Aseret HaDibrot, and then we have the way that it's presented in Parshat Ki Tisa and Parshat Vayakhel. In Parshat B'Shalach, the Torah tells us the following. The Torah says that the Vayhi bayom hashishi laktu lachem mishneh shnei ha'omer le'echad vayavo kol nisiei ha'edah vayigidu leMoshe vayomer aleihem hu asher diber Hashem Shabaton Shabbat Kodesh Lashem. That today is a Shabaton, a holy day to God, right? Or tomorrow. And therefore, prepare what you're going to prepare today and not anything else. Next in next week's Parsha in Yitro, a few weeks later, in terms of what the Torah, in terms of the timeline of the Torah, suddenly we have a new aspect which didn't appear here. Lo ta'aseh kol belacha. Don't perform any activity. And then but there is no penalty that's mentioned. And finally, we have the idea of mechalaleha mot yumat. A person who violates the Shabbat, this new concept which is introduced here called chilul Shabbat, which hadn't been introduced before, has a penalty. It's a capital crime. So you see a development of the way that Shabbat is presented to the Jewish people. This is important, perhaps, if you will, historically, but more importantly, because each of these aspects is a different aspect of Shabbat. And even though we have all of the composite aspects, we still need to understand that they are analytically separate ideas which need to be looked at independently. If we take a look at what our parsha is talking about, so our parsha is this idea of Shabaton, right? The idea that we should have this as a day of, call it a day of rest, in terms of its basic concept. There is the Netziv, I'm not going to read the Netziv inside here in number 10, again because of the time, but the Netziv understands that when the Torah said to Bnei Yisrael, whatever you're going to prepare, whatever you're going to, et asher tafu afu, whatever you're going to bake, it's not because at that point it was usher to bake on Shabbat, but rather it was because it had to be prepared beforehand. And it was not because we have a malacha on Shabbat, but here, just to take the one key line here, she'efshar l'chol b'Shabbat el masha huchan al Shabbat Kodesh, aval im lo huchan shel erev Shabbatu. So he says that at the time of the man, it had to be prepared. You had to have a notion of preparation for Shabbat because of the sanctity of Shabbat. And if you didn't prepare it for Shabbat, in whatever way you were going to prepare it, so then it would deteriorate the same way that the man deteriorated any other day of the week. That's the idea. So that's the most basic aspect. In other words, to treat Shabbat as a special day. And here, this idea of Shabaton, which appears later on in the Torah as well. So the Ramban, in a very important formulation, basically says the reason why the Torah says that something is Shabaton is that I'm not going to read the first paragraph, but basically he creates he speaks of a model of the medieval marketplace, and he goes through example by example of how you can run a marketplace almost at full force and not be over a single Isur of Shabbat, at least not an Isur d'Oraita. So he says the Torah is well aware of that, which is why the Torah says it's a Yom Shabbaton, it's a day of rest, and therefore treat it as a Yom Shvita U'Menucha Lo Yom Torah. It should be a day of resting, a day of abstaining from activity, not a day of bother and trouble. That's the idea of Shabaton, and that's a D'Oraita. In the same way, and he gives this example here in number 14, the same way that the Torah says, for example, Kedoshim Tihiyu, right? Be a holy nation, and that's to prevent people from being Naval Birshut HaTorah, prevent people from being following the Torah, but at the same time, not being a holy individual at all. In other words, what we sometimes call the spirit of halacha, the ruach of halacha. And the Ramban says this is a d'oraita. It's not a d'Rabbanan. It's not, when I talk about the spirit of Shabbat, right? It's not Shabbosdik. That, the Ramban would say, is not a rabbinic idea. It's rather, it goes to the heart of Shabbaton. And I think it's very important to understand that the first thing the Torah tells us in the Man is that when it comes to Shabbat is Shabaton. Torah doesn't talk about the Isur Malacha first. The Torah certainly doesn't talk about the penalty first. That develops afterwards. But the first and foremost and most basic aspect of Shabbat is Shabaton, to understand what makes Shabbat a day of rest. And I think that the same way that the Ramban, and I want to leave you with this thought, the same way that the Ramban took his technology and took his society and said, take a look at our society and see what can be done without violating any Isur d'Oraita. And the Torah tells us, nevertheless, Shabbaton, and these activities are inappropriate for a day of Shabbat. I think the same thing has to be done 800 years later, or 700 years later in the case of the Ramban, 750 years later in our society. And we now have to say, okay, with our technologies and with our society and with a leisure society, which the Ramban and anyone until maybe 50 years ago could not possibly have imagined, how do I create a Shabbaton today? And the things that may or may not, and I'll just give an example from using our technology where people instinctively understand this, with the use of timers, and that's a shir in of itself. But it's quite common for people to, let's say, have a timer on their plata on Shabbat. The timer turns on a plata, and if you were to turn on a plata on Shabbat, it goes back to that first thing that we were talking about, namely that the electricity is doing a malacha d'oraita. You're over an isur d'oraita when if you were to turn on a plata yourself. But we allow for the use of the timer to do so. At the same time, very few people, if any, and the people who do probably do it without letting anyone else know, use a timer for their television sets. Because there's something which is understood that if you're watching TV on Shabbat, then this is a violation of Shabbaton. Now, the issue of turning on a television, certainly if you're talking about a television, which is a flat screen, modern TV, the Isuri D'Oraita, it's not so clear what they are exactly, if there are any Isuri D'Oraita, probably not an Isur D'Oraita. And we have to go back to those categories that I spoke about earlier in the shir, D'Rabbanan. But yet we don't use a timer for it because we understand that and this is when I say we, I think it's a grassroots type of understanding. It's not coming from above, that we understand that this is just not appropriate for Shabbat. And this is the type of thinking that I think that we're going to have to be using with regard to electricity as we move forward. Try to understand which aspects, which technologies, what things that are being done. If I have let's say I have an Uber autonomous vehicle that comes up and picks me up on Shabbat, is that and I ordered it before Shabbat. So is that a violation of Shabaton if I am traveling, even if I don't leave the Tchum Shabbat? Is that a violation of Shabaton if I have travel? If I use a electronic device, again, even if I find a way to get around any electrical problem, is that a violation of Shabaton if I use that for long distance communication? In other words, how do I define this? And this is something which is going to be something which is developing, or should be developing, should be something which is part of a public discussion. Because otherwise we're going to, if we don't engage in this discussion, I think that we're going to be left with those other two alternatives that I mentioned before. Namely, that it's going to either be a situation where we basically are stuck with technologies which are obsolete because you can't use the modern up-to-date technologies on Shabbat as they become more and more ubiquitous, or we're going to have to try to create a hashgacha system that's defining each and every single technology, what is mutter, what isn't mutter, and there will be things that fall through the cracks. You know, there'll be things that where, if you were to think about it, it should be usher according to those technologies, but people just continue to use them anyway. You know, it's going, which will eventually lead to I think, a deterioration in the way people view the kedusha of Shabbat. And I think certainly from an educational and a philosophical perspective, the most important way of dealing with it is this last way, namely to be looking at the question of what is Shabbaton in the modern world and how do we apply it as we move forward. Again, I'm sorry that the shir was truncated a little bit in the middle, and that we went overtime. And I look forward to having the ability again to have a live shir in person, so that way we don't have to worry about technology cutting us short. Okay, it was wonderful seeing you all.
The cart and I left it in my car. So I and I have her car, so just take the second cart because they're.
Okay.
Rabbi Susman?
Yes.
The other point that might be coming up, you bring up these autonomous cars. There are people who can't get around. They can't operate a little somewhere vehicle, but they would love to come into shul, just to be in the future when things get back to whatever normal is. And there will be, I don't know, in 5 years from now or 3 years, there'll be a device that can come pick you up at your home, take you to where you wanted to go, and this 80 or 90-year-old person or 100-year-old person or this deformed person will be able to be a minion. What a feeling that will be to do that.
Okay, so this is again, this is the type of thing that we're talking about. I see also the question came up with regard to asking Alexa to turn on the AC. I'm not poskening here. I want to stress that right now. I am not poskening on any particular case. These are problematic issues of how to deal with it. The same way, if it's very, very hot, perhaps I can, under certain circumstances, I can turn on the electricity, or have have someone have either a non-Jew or a small child turn it on. Perhaps. I'm not saying yes. I'm not saying no. Again, I'm not poskening. Certainly not in this kind of forum. But and then there are specific issues with regard to Alexa, in terms of, is that more direct if I'm telling Alexa what to do, as opposed to, let's say, using a sensor. But again, so I don't want to get into the halachic nitty gritty, but the point of this year was to give you a sense of what the halachic nitty gritty is, because that's, I think, very important. You can't talk about the ideas without understanding some of at least on a basic level, what the halachic questions are, but at the same time, to be looking at it not only from the perspective of the trees or even sometimes the leaves of the trees in the halachic forest, but to be looking at a bird's eye view of the forest itself. And that leads to the question, in terms of electric vehicles. You can look at it this way. I remember there was many years ago, Rabbi Riskin told me, I think it was, I don't remember whether it was in a personal conversation or it was in a lecture, and he mentioned that when his first years at, more than 50 years ago at Lincoln Square Synagogue, so he got the idea of having a non-Jewish driver driving a bus on a route up and down, I think Amsterdam or Broadway, whatever it was, to pick up people to bring them to shul on Shabbat. And he even had a name for this. He wanted to call it the Shah bus. Okay, and so this would happen. Everyone would know, 15 minutes before shul started, it would be at 86th Street, and then drive down to the shul, and you just have to be there. The bus driver would open it, whether you're there or not. You'd get on the bus and you come down. And he asked Rav Soloveitchik at the time whether this was permissible, and Rav Soloveitchik said under no circumstances should he allow for it. And the rationale at the time was because the line that divided the Orthodoxy and Reform and Conservative was this idea of traveling in a car to shul on Shabbat. And the Rav felt at the time that it was a line that could not be crossed no matter what. I've heard more recently that in certain Orthodox communities, they have that kind of arrangement to bring people to shul. Perhaps now the concern with regard to the threat from Reform and Conservative isn't as strong, or perhaps they were not aware of that psak of the Rav. I don't know. But these are the type of questions that need to be asked. In other words, because you can make a very strong argument that one of the strengths of the community, the Orthodox community, has been that we have to live within walking distance to the shul. And that part of the reason why from a sociological perspective, why the conservative and reform movements have had so much difficulty abroad is because they've lost a sense of community. And this is very important. As you can make that argument too. So should that come at the price of individuals who can't make it to shul otherwise? Maybe or maybe not. But that's a part of I think a need for a public discourse to discuss those very issues. What is considered to be Shabaton and what is not considered to be Shabaton in the modern era. So I've gone way over. I mean, mainly not because of anyone's fault per se, but that's because of the Zoom ending in the middle and then waiting for us to be able to restart the shir. But I see that Rabbi Taylor is here, and it's really not fair to continue. But anyway, I will, anyone who wants to be in touch with me, offline, I'll be happy to continue the conversation. Kol Tuv and Shabbat Shalom, a happy Tu B'Shvat, and looking forward to, again, seeing everyone in person in Shir.
Amen.